They came into your life with the intention of making you smaller. Maybe they didn't use that word. Maybe they didn't even think of it that way. But that was the project, to reduce you, to make you more manageable, more dependent, more uncertain of the ground beneath your own feet. That was the goal from the beginning. And for a while it worked. You started questioning things you used to know. Your memory, your judgment, your right to feel what you were feeling. You became careful in ways you'd never had to be before, measuring your words, reading the room, bracing for reactions you couldn't always predict but learned to always expect. They were good at it. Whatever else you can say about what happened, they were skilled at the particular work of erosion. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that happens so gradually that by the time you notice how much has been worn away, you can barely remember the shape of what was there before. But here is the thing they never calculated. The thing that no narcissist, in all their strategic intelligence, ever fully accounts for. The human capacity to be broken open rather than simply broken. To go through something that was meant to end you and come out the other side not smaller, but forged. Harder in the places that used to give way. Clearer in the places that used to blur. What they intended as destruction became, without their permission and entirely against their design, transformation. Not the easy kind. Not the kind that makes a good inspirational quote. The real kind, slow, unglamorous, paid for in full with grief and confusion and the specific loneliness of rebuilding yourself in a silence nobody around you quite understood. This is not a story about becoming stronger because suffering is secretly a gift. It isn't. What was done to you was not a gift. It was damage inflicted by someone who chose to damage rather than heal, and it deserved better from the person who chose to do it. But damage, when survived, produces something the person who inflicted it cannot replicate, cannot access, cannot take from you now. It produces someone who has been to the bottom of self-doubt and found solid ground beneath it. Someone who has been gaslit into questioning their own reality and learned, through that very experience, to trust their perception with a precision they never would have developed any other way. Someone who knows, not from reading about it but from living through it, exactly what manipulation looks like, sounds like, and feels like in the body. The narcissist tried to create someone they could always defeat. A version of you so uncertain, so destabilized, so dependent on their approval that the power dynamic would hold forever. What they created instead is someone they cannot touch. Not because you became invulnerable, but because you became awake. And awake people cannot be gaslit back to sleep. This is the story of that transformation. Not the highlight reel version. The real one, with all the darkness and the backward steps and the days when you genuinely didn't know if you were going to make it through. Because the truth of what you survived deserves to be told accurately. And the person you became on the other side deserves to be seen completely. So let's go back to the beginning of it. Let's walk through what they actually did, what it actually produced, and why the version of you that exists right now, reading this, or listening to this, or simply still here, is the one outcome they were never prepared for and can never undo. Chapter 2. Psychological Breakdown. The narcissist's project of destruction is not random. It has a logic, a cold, functional logic that serves a specific psychological purpose. They do not destroy indiscriminately. They target what threatens them. And what threatens a narcissist, above almost everything else, is a person with a stable, authentic sense of self. People who know who they are cannot be easily manipulated. They push back. They name what's happening. They trust their own perception even when someone is working hard to undermine it. They are, in the narcissist's psychological ecosystem, genuinely dangerous. And so the first order of business, whether conscious or not, is to dismantle that stability. Gaslighting is the primary tool because it targets the instrument itself, not what you think, but your ability to trust that you're thinking clearly at all. A person who doubts their own mind will eventually outsource their reality to the person who seems most certain. And the narcissist is always certain. Certainty is a performance they have been perfecting since childhood. The isolation that follows is not accidental. Friends who might confirm your perception get subtly edged out. Family relationships get complicated by narratives the narcissist plants carefully. The social infrastructure that might have held you up during the erosion gets dismantled piece by piece, until the narcissist's voice is the loudest one in the room. Eventually, the only one. Then comes the intermittent reinforcement, the cycling between warmth and withdrawal that creates the psychological equivalent of addiction. Your nervous system stops regulating around your own emotional baseline and begins regulating around theirs. Their mood becomes your weather forecast. Their approval becomes the sun. And you spend enormous energy trying to position yourself in its light. What this does to the self over time is documented and measurable. Survivors of narcissistic abuse show physiological markers of chronic stress, elevated cortisol, hyperactive amygdala response, disrupted sleep architecture. The body keeps the score of what the mind is still trying to make sense of. And the score is significant. But here is the psychological paradox at the center of the narcissist's destruction project, the one they never see coming because their own psychology prevents them from imagining it. The very tools they use to dismantle you are the tools that eventually build you into someone they cannot dismantle. Each tactic, survived, produces an immunity it cannot produce any other way. Surviving gaslighting makes you acutely, almost uncomfortably attuned to reality distortion. You start to recognize it in seconds. The slight reframing, the subtle denial, the gentle suggestion that your experience is the problem rather than the behavior that produced it. You don't have to think about it. Your nervous system flags it before your conscious mind catches up. Surviving isolation makes you ruthlessly clear about who belongs in your life. The people who were worth keeping found their way back. The ones who didn't, the ones who were never actually on your side, revealed themselves through the dynamic in ways you might otherwise never have seen. You know the difference now, in a way that is bone deep and permanent. Surviving intermittent reinforcement, perhaps the hardest of all, makes you extraordinarily discerning about what you're willing to call love. You know what it feels like to confuse intensity for intimacy, to mistake being needed for being cherished. You will never make that specific mistake again. Not because you closed your heart, because you finally understood what your heart was actually designed for. Chapter 3. Dramatic Turning Point. The turning point rarely announces itself as significant. It doesn't usually arrive as a dramatic confrontation or a final moment of clarity so clean it changes everything at once. It arrives, for most survivors, as something smaller. A moment of stillness in the middle of the chaos where something inside you, something they had worked very hard to silence, said, "Enough." Maybe it was the first time you caught yourself apologizing for something you knew, in your body, you hadn't done. And instead of apologizing anyway, which you had learned to do so automatically, it had stopped feeling like a choice. You paused. Just for a second. And in that second, something shifted. Maybe it was the first time their rage didn't land the way it used to. The first time you watched the performance of their anger and felt, underneath the familiar fear, a new and quiet thing. Clarity. You saw it. The mechanics of it. The way it escalated to a specific pitch designed to produce a specific response in you. And seeing it made it smaller. Maybe it was the moment a friend said something simple, not even about the relationship, just about you, that reminded you of a version of yourself you had almost forgotten existed. A version that laughed easily. That had opinions. That didn't calculate every word before speaking it. And the distance between that version and the one you'd become hit you all at once. Whatever it was, whatever specific, quiet, unglamorous moment marked the beginning of the turn, it mattered more than any dramatic confrontation could have. Because it came from inside you. Not from an ultimatum, not from an intervention, not from someone else's timeline for your healing. From the part of you they could diminish but could never fully reach. What follows the turning point is not immediately triumph. Let's be honest about that. What follows is often more confusion, more second-guessing, more of the very self-doubt they installed, now running against the new clarity rather than in service of the old compliance. The two things coexist, often painfully, for longer than anyone who hasn't lived it can understand. But the narcissist begins to sense the shift even before you can articulate it. Because their psychological survival has depended on reading you, on monitoring the signals that tell them how much access they still have. And the signals are changing. Your responses are slightly slower. Your apologies slightly less automatic. Your eyes slightly steadier when they push. They escalate. Of course they escalate. When the usual tactics stop producing the usual results, the narcissist does not reflect on the tactics. They intensify them. More pressure. More manipulation. More love bombing or more cruelty or more of whichever particular instrument had always worked best on you specifically. And the escalation, paradoxically, accelerates the turning point rather than reversing it. Because watching someone try harder to manipulate you, now that you can see the mechanism, is one of the most clarifying experiences available to a survivor. It removes the ambiguity. It answers the question you had been asking yourself for months or years. Is this real or is this strategy? Watching the strategy intensify when the usual returns diminish answers that question definitively. The narcissist, in trying to recover the control they feel slipping, hands you the final piece of the clarity you needed. They show you, more completely than they ever have before, exactly who they are and exactly what the relationship has always been. And that showing, however painful, is the gift wrapped inside the escalation that they never meant to give you. Chapter 4. Collapse and Consequences. When the survivor finally moves, out of the relationship, out of the dynamic, out of the psychological proximity that kept the narcissist's influence active, the consequences unfold on both sides simultaneously. And the contrast between those two sets of consequences is one of the most psychologically revealing things about the entire arc of narcissistic abuse. For the narcissist, the loss of a survivor who has genuinely turned is categorically different from other losses. Because the survivor is not leaving in confusion, in grief, in the desperate hope that distance will prompt change. They are leaving with clarity. And a person leaving with clarity cannot be easily retrieved. The usual tactics do not find purchase in someone who can see the tactics clearly. The hoovering begins, sometimes immediately, sometimes after a strategic pause designed to let anxiety build on your end. But the survivor who has reached genuine clarity experiences the hoovering differently now. Not as hope, as information. Each attempt to pull you back confirms what the clarity already told you, that the relationship was never about who you are. It was about what you provided. The smear campaign that often follows, the narcissist repositioning themselves as the wounded party to mutual connections, lands differently too. Because the survivor who has done the internal work doesn't need other people's validation of their experience the way they once did. The external narrative the narcissist constructs no longer has the power to destabilize an internal knowing that was built through lived experience, not opinion. Meanwhile, the survivor is doing the slow, non-linear, frequently exhausting work of reassembly. Therapy if accessible. Journaling. Long conversations with the friends who were kept at distance and are now being carefully, gratefully invited back in. The gradual, sometimes tentative practice of trusting their own perception in the small, daily moments where it matters, and watching that trust hold. The hypervigilance that the relationship produced, the constant scanning for threat, the bracing, the exhausting attunement to another person's emotional state at the expense of their own, begins, slowly, to ease. Not because it was simply decided away. Because the environment changed. And nervous systems, given consistent evidence of safety, do eventually update their operating conditions. New relationships, friendships first, then slowly, carefully, intimate ones, feel different. Not easier necessarily, not without fear. But different in kind. The red flags that once slipped past now register immediately. The patterns that once seemed romantic now read as warning. And the relationships that are genuinely healthy feel, at first, almost disorienting in their steadiness, before they begin to feel like what love was always supposed to be. The professional and creative self that was suppressed, because the narcissist's relationship with their partner's success is always complicated, always competitive, always subtly or overtly undermining, begins to surface again. Ideas that were dismissed, ambitions that were minimized, capabilities that were quietly but consistently treated as threats to the narcissist's sense of superiority, these begin to breathe again in the space their departure created. And the survivor begins to understand something that reframes the entire experience without minimizing a single moment of its cost. The relationship, which was designed to make them permanently smaller, produced instead the specific set of insights, boundaries, perceptions, and hard-won clarity that makes them, now, one of the most psychologically aware people in any room they enter. That awareness was not available any other way. It was forged in the only fire hot enough to produce it. The narcissist collapsed inward. The survivor expanded outward. These are not equal outcomes dressed in different language. They are the natural consequences of two fundamentally different responses to the same relationship, one that extracted and one that eventually, painfully, brilliantly chose to grow. Chapter 5. Final Truth plus Healing. Here is the truth that the narcissist's entire project was designed to prevent you from ever reaching. You were never the problem that needed fixing. You were the mirror that needed breaking. Because a person who sees themselves clearly cannot be indefinitely controlled by someone whose survival depends on distorted reflection. You were targeted because of your clarity, not despite it. The self-doubt they installed was never evidence of your weakness. It was evidence of how sophisticated the campaign against your self-trust was. Intelligent, feeling, self-aware people are the most susceptible to gaslighting, not because they are gullible, but because they take their own potential for error seriously. The narcissist exploited your intellectual honesty. And that exploitation is on them, entirely. What you built in the aftermath, however imperfect, however incomplete it still feels, was built under conditions that would have defeated many people entirely. You rebuilt your sense of reality while still being told your reality was wrong. You rebuilt your self-trust while still carrying the residue of someone else's sustained effort to destroy it. That is not ordinary recovery. That is something rarer and harder and more worth acknowledging than most people around you will ever fully understand. The person you are now, the one with the sharper perception, the clearer boundaries, the ability to recognize manipulation before it fully lands, the hard-won knowledge of exactly what you will and will not accept in a relationship, that person did not exist before what you survived. Not in this form. Not with this particular quality of knowing. They could not have. This version of you required what you went through to become possible. That is not the same as saying what happened was worth it. It wasn't. You should not have had to pay that price for this knowledge. The relationship should have been safe. The person should have been capable of genuine love. None of what was done to you was necessary or justified or secretly purposeful in some cosmic sense. It was damage. And you deserved better. And yet, and this is the truth that lives alongside that one without canceling it, what you became because of it is real. The strength is real. The clarity is real. The particular quality of compassion you now carry for others who are living inside what you survived, that is real, and it is rare, and it matters in ways that extend far beyond your own story. The narcissist cannot defeat you now. Not because you became cold or closed or armored against feeling, but because you became integrated. The parts of you they tried to separate, your trust from your perception, your love from your judgment, your compassion from your boundaries, those parts are reunited now. And a person who is whole is extraordinarily difficult to divide and conquer. They wanted someone they could always return to, always manipulate, always find available for extraction whenever the need arose. What they created instead is someone who would recognize them immediately upon return, name the dynamic clearly, and decline, not with anger, not with drama, but with the quiet, immovable certainty of a person who has already paid the tuition for this particular lesson and has no interest in enrolling again. The life ahead of you, the one being built in the space their absence created, is not a consolation prize for what you lost. It is the actual life. The one that was always possible but could not be fully inhabited while you were occupied with managing someone else's psychological survival at the expense of your own. That life is not smaller for what you went through. It is more deliberately, more consciously, more fiercely yours. They wanted to destroy you. They didn't. They couldn't. And the version of you that exists right now, still standing, still building, still choosing yourself one quiet decision at a time, is living proof of something they will never be able to take credit for and will never be able to undo. You are the one thing they made that they never meant to make. You are someone they can never defeat again.